Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Monday, the 23rd of May. I'm Eilon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. The coalition agreement between the Likud and Yisrael Beitenu, which was expected to be finalized by now, has hit a snag. Representatives of both parties, including Finance Minister Moshe Yaalon, met today in an attempt to seal the deal. However, negotiations have apparently reached a deadlock over the issue of pensions for new immigrants. Sources close to the finance minister say the talks stalled over Israel Beitenu head Avigdor Lieberman's demand that the state cough up billions of shekels to pay for the pensions of new Olim, tens of thousands of whom are from the former Soviet Union. In a statement issued this afternoon, Yisrael Beitenu said it had already compromised on matters of religion and state and on the death penalty for terrorists, but shall not compromise on the defense portfolio and pensions reform. The party said it would make an honest effort to resolve the dispute, but stressed it cannot move forward if there is no will on the other side too. Finance ministry officials balked at Yisrael Beitenu's demand with its high price tag, saying it raises legal and ethical problems for welfare benefits to apply based on place of birth. Yaalon reportedly told the Prime Minister that his 10-seat party would not remain in coalition if the measure were forced through. Speaking last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lashed out at the media, accusing reporters of whining and fear-mongering over the imminent appointment of Avigdor Lieberman as defense minister in place of Moshe Yaalon. In a press conference with his visiting Czech counterpart, Bohuslav Sobotka, Netanyahu reiterated he has a proven track record in protecting Israel, which proves that he's done a good job over the years. The Prime Minister stressed he remains committed to the country's security, saying that he prefers to stick to deeds and less rhetoric. At the same time, Netanyahu said he was leaving the foreign minister post open as an incentive for the Zionist Union to resume talks to join the coalition. Well, for his part, Zionist Union leader Isaac Herzog today confirmed that the door has officially closed on the option of his party joining the coalition. Writing on Twitter, Herzog rejected an offer from the Prime Minister to resume talks, saying this chapter had closed. Herzog accused Netanyahu of being a prisoner in the hands of the most extreme government and vowed that the opposition would fight back. Meanwhile, opposition within the opposition continues. Herzog was the target of harsh criticism from fellow party members as the faction convened Sunday for its first meeting since coalition talks collapsed last week. 6 of the party's MKs chose to boycott the meeting, namely Sheli Yachimovich, Miki Rosenthal, Erel Margalit, Omer Bar-Lev, Stav Shafir and Yossi Yona. Yachimovich stressed the need to heal the rifts within the party, but said that she did not want to be subjected to Herzog's continuous accusations, blaming her and other MKs for causing the failure of the talks. Visiting French Prime Minister Manuel Valls, who arrived in the region to promote the French peace initiative, met today with President Rivlin in Jerusalem. He later held talks with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who continued to express opposition to the French peace plan, saying it offers the Palestinians a chance to evade direct negotiations. Instead, Netanyahu offered to hold bilateral talks directly with Palestinian President Abbas. For his part, Valls emphasized his country's strong friendship with Israel and said he will discuss Netanyahu's proposal with French President François Hollande.
I'm prepared to make difficult decisions. And if you really want to help launch peace, then help us launch direct negotiations with Mahmoud Abbas. And that's why I would gladly accept a different French initiative. And here's the one important change. This initiative can still take place in Paris, because that would be a marvelous place to sign a peace accord. It's a marvelous place anyway. It can still be called the French initiative because you would host this genuine effort for peace. But here's the difference. I will sit alone, directly, with President Abbas in the Elysee Palace or anywhere else that you choose. Every difficult issue will be on the table.
Prior to his meeting with Netanyahu this morning, the French premier paid respects to the 4 Jews murdered in the Paris Hyper terror attack in January of last year. Valls stood before the Jerusalem graves of victims Yoav Khattab, Philippe Braham, Yohan Cohen and Francois-Michel Saada before placing stones on their tombstones. The trial of Elor Azaria, the IDF soldier accused of killing a disarmed Palestinian terrorist in Tel Aviv, Hebron at the end of March, continued this morning at the Jaffa Military Court. The hearing began after one of the 3 presiding judges was replaced due to his prior acquaintance with the commander of the IDF's Hebron brigade, who is set to testify in the proceedings. In April, Azaria was charged with manslaughter and inappropriate military conduct for shooting and killing the wounded man who just minutes earlier had attacked soldiers in the West Bank city. The case sparked much controversy and fueled political tensions across the country as top defense officials, including the IDF Chief of Staff and outgoing Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon, condemned the soldiers' actions. This Hebron shooting incident was among the matters of disagreement between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Yaalon prior to the latter's resignation. In his last words to army commanders at a farewell ceremony yesterday, the outgoing defense minister called on the IDF to win, but to remain humane. IBA's Azaria O'Sullivan has more.
There is great trepidation on the 14th floor of this building, shared by the IDF Chief of Staff and the Defense Minister. As he left, Yaalon wanted to avoid the photo of himself with his apparent successor, Avigdor Lieberman. Yesterday afternoon, he bid farewell to the place he without a doubt feels most comfortable, the IDF General Staff, the same forum where he remained silent 2 weeks ago as the Prime Minister toasted the state. Yesterday, he found his voice. We have here a balanced and responsible team under the leadership of a Chief of Staff that knows how to use force in an intelligent manner, he said. The generals around the table all owe their posts to Yaalon and Eisenkot, but it's unclear if it will remain without a shakeup under a new defense minister. An army needs to win, he said, but it also needs to remain humane. Even after the battle or operation or war, we need to maintain our values and remain human beings. His comments stand in sharp contrast to his resignation speech when he described the Likud party and Israeli political leadership as being led by dangerous extremists. This is the second time that Yaalon leaves the Kiryat headquarters under bitter atmosphere. In 2005, then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon cut short his term as Chief of Staff and replaced him with Air Force Commander Dan Chalutz. Sources close to the outgoing defense minister said he would most likely give his replacement the briefing when he takes over. Ariel Sullivan for IBA News.
Hours before his scheduled swearing-in as the next member of Knesset for the Likud party, Yehuda Glick visited the Temple Mount this morning, vowing it would be the last time until the end of his parliamentary service. Glick, who is replacing outgoing Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon as an MK, told reporters that once he is a Knesset member, he has no intention of violating the Prime Minister's orders barring lawmakers from visiting the holy site. The 50-year-old activist has for years fought for Jewish rights on the Temple Mount. In October 2014, he was the victim of an assassination attempt when he was shot 4 times by a Palestinian assailant at close range in Jerusalem. The summer session of the Knesset is scheduled to open this evening. After the traditional non-confidence votes happening now, called by the opposition, the Knesset will hold a special session to mark Theodor Herzl Day, with speeches by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and embattled opposition leader Isaac Herzog. The summer session is set to be defined by the entry of the 5-member Israel Beitenu faction into government if negotiations are successfully concluded, which will expand the coalition from 61 to 66 MKs and thereby release the Prime Minister from dependence on individual lawmakers. Among the first items on the agenda, the Knesset will soon swear in Avigdor Lieberman as Defense Minister and Yehuda Glick as new Likud MK. This, of course, should the negotiations with the Israel Beitenu conclude successfully. Several controversial bills are expected to return to the agenda now that the government has a stable majority. The summer session will last until the 7th of August. Well, joining me now to discuss what we can expect from the Knesset summer session is Lahav Harkov, senior Knesset reporter for the Jerusalem Post. Welcome, Lahav.
Thanks for having me.
Now that Prime Minister Netanyahu has a stable right-wing coalition, what sort of legislation can we expect to be passed during the Knesset summer session?
Well, first of all, as we just saw a few minutes ago, it's not so certain that Netanyahu has this stable right-wing coalition. But working on the theory that he will have it and he will work things out with Lieberman, a lot of the sort of right-wing proposals that came up in the last year plus since the election will have a much easier time going through and being passed as law. So one example of that, which is coming to a committee vote on Wednesday, is the NGO transparency bill, which requires organizations that receive most of their funding from foreign political entities to declare themselves as such in all published materials and in all advertisements. And this bill is very controversial because it really only ends up applying to left-wing organizations. There aren't really any right-wing organizations that fall under that category.
So in the past, the Prime Minister has on occasion watered down certain controversial bills, or they've been whittled down in coalition. Can we expect, should we have a right-wing majority, for these bills to go through in a strong form?
I think that there'll still be a sort of watering down of a lot of these bills. The NGO bill in its current form is watered down a lot from past proposals. But other bills as well, I think, will be somewhat moderated. Not just because of the Prime Minister, but also because of the presence of the Kulanu party in the coalition. They have 10 seats, which means that if they don't support the bill, it won't pass. And so they have a lot of power sort of to water things down.
So on that subject, exactly, even though the entire parliamentary right is now might soon be in the coalition, right, what can we expect to be the main battle lines between different parties in government?
Well, I think it's a lot of these sort of liberal issues and issues that are sort of about the balance of the different branches of government. I think Kulanu has really put its foot down on those kinds of things. And so I think legislation that's seen as sort of far right-wing proposals will be the battleground. Normally, I would say religion and state would be a battleground, but Lieberman has actually agreed to sort of give up on his positions and not bring up those issues as long as he's sitting in the coalition with the ultra-Orthodox parties.
So we can expect to see that a lot of the reversal of secular legislation from recent years is going to continue?
Yes.
Okay, well, once the government has its stable majority, what sort of impact can we expect the parties that remain in opposition to have on legislation? What strategies are open to them to influence the political process?
Well, when a Knesset member's in the opposition, and especially now that the opposition is sort of a more usual size as opposed to large as it was until, or likely will be until this week, the best strategy for the opposition is to think big by thinking small. They can pass sort of small bills that don't cost the government a lot of money and are often on social issues, and those kinds of bills usually pass. So merits, for example, is actually often very effective in passing legislation, a lot of times on women's issues, on helping battered women, for example.
With the support of members of the government in the...
Yes, and they're able to sort of recruit members of the government to support their bills on things like that. So they need to sort of look for the consensus issues where they can make a difference.
Okay, well, we previously mentioned Temple Mount activist Yehuda Glick will be sworn in soon as a new Likud MK. What sort of politician do we predict he's going to be?
Sure, so after Yehuda Glick is sworn in on Wednesday, actually, Wednesday at noon, I think that he'll surprise a lot of people who haven't been paying close attention to him. He has a reputation as a hardliner and as an extremist, but he actually is in a lot of ways very liberal and very willing to compromise and to hear people out. And he's consistently, when you ask him about his political opinions about things other than the Temple Mount, he comes down on the moderate side of Likud and not necessarily on the far right, not, on Beit UD, let's say, which is further to the right of Likud.
Well, we previously saw during the Hebron shooting incident that he'd condemned the shooting. Are these sorts of positions perhaps going to put him in tension with some of the more hardline members in the Likud?
It's possible. I think he's very popular in the Likud. I was just in the Knesset and saw him at a Likud faction meeting, and everybody was really happy to see him and really happy that he's going to be a Knesset member soon. So he's certainly going to enjoy a honeymoon phase.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, Lahav. Thank you very much for coming in, and enjoy the opening of the session this evening.
Thank you.
Israeli residents living near the country's northern border with Lebanon are concerned by a series of tall observation towers constructed by the Lebanese army in recent weeks, which they fear could be used to attack Israel. The towers, manned by Lebanese soldiers, are located along the border between Kibbutz Rosh HaNikra and Moshav Zarit, and offer a view of Israeli army bases, local roads, agricultural plots, and civilian communities. Residents say they fear that in times of conflict, the watchtowers could be taken over by Hezbollah fighters. Israeli military officials said the army is closely monitoring the situation. A senior Iranian military commander boasted that the Islamic Republic could raise the Zionist regime in less than 8 minutes. Ahmed Karimpour, a senior advisor to the elite Al-Quds force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, recently told Iranian reporters that if the supreme leader Ali Khamenei gave the order to destroy Israel, the Iranian military would be able to do so quickly. Karimpour's statements follow a series of similar threats made by Iranian security officials in recent months, including Hebrew inscriptions on missiles tested by the army that call for the destruction of the Jewish state. Khamenei has repeatedly threatened to destroy Israel, and last September suggested Israel would not be around in 25 years' time. Over to Tel Aviv, where a Bedouin employee at a Tel Aviv supermarket was released to house arrest this morning, a day after he was assaulted by police, who reportedly used excessive force against him. The Police Internal Affairs Department is investigating the actions of policemen against Maysam Abu El-Kayan from Khura in the Negev after he was spotted on surveillance footage talking to 2 plainclothes officers who then beat him after he refused to identify himself. Other policemen then joined in the ensuing fracas. From the footage, it remains unclear who threw the first punch, and there are conflicting versions of the incident. However, witnesses claim police used brutal force and also cursed an elderly woman who questioned their actions. Police also allege El-Kayan beat one of the officers. 4 years after Israeli antiquity rangers nabbed a pair of 3,000-year-old sarcophagus covers, Israel handed them over to the Egyptian ambassador at a special ceremony at the Foreign Ministry yesterday. The covers were made out of palm wood, covered in plaster and adorned with hieroglyphics. They're believed to have been stolen by grave robbers in western Egypt, who sawed them in half in order to smuggle them out of the country in a suitcase. They were seized from an antiquities merchant who had had them smuggled from Dubai. They have been held under climate-controlled conditions for the past 4 years until warming relations with Cairo enabled their repatriation. Egyptian Ambassador Hazem Khairat said he appreciates the efforts made by Israel and is looking forward to the return of other smuggled antiquities found in the country. A prominent British historian has rejected the Dan David Prize, a prestigious Israeli award, describing her decision as an independent political choice concerning the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Professor Catherine Hall of University College London declined to accept the $300,000 prize, which was to be awarded to her in recognition of her contributions as a pioneer in gender history at a ceremony at Tel Aviv University. Her actions were lauded by the British Committee for the Universities of Palestine, which said her decision was a significant endorsement of the campaign to end ties with Israeli institutions. The organisers of the prize said they would use the cash instead to provide scholarships to history students at Tel Aviv University and abroad. Over to finance. Shares are mixed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, and the shekel is mostly down against major foreign currencies. Here are the figures. Turning to the weather, and tomorrow should still be cloudy with localized rainfall until the afternoon in the north of the country and possibly in the central and northern Negev. Temperatures should remain stable with strong westerly winds. Here are the highs and lows for Israel and overseas. And that concludes today's show. Join me again tomorrow for the latest news from Israel.